There is a new claim from the LGBTQ community. We will be investigating that today. The claim is God supports LGBTQ relationships. In fact, he prefers them. That is the claim we'll be investigating today. Okay, so let's establish how we're going to proceed with this video. First of all, we will review the entire verse that is in question. We will then establish a pass-fail criteria. We will then move on to establishing context. We would then review the multiple claims that are made. Go ahead and talk about the definitions that we will be using. And then once that is all established, that's all groundwork, we'll then be able to dive into the verse and examine the claims in full context. We'll end with our conclusion and open it up with a Q&A and then wrap it up with a prayer. So let's go ahead and start looking at what this verse actually is and what these claims are. So let's start by reviewing the verse in its entirety. And here it is. It is Matthew 19:12. For there are eunuchs who are born that way, and there are eunuchs who have been made eunuchs by others, and there are those who choose to live like eunuchs for the sake of the kingdom of heaven. The one who can accept this should accept it. Again, that's Matthew 19:12. Okay, from that, let's go ahead and look at the context that we would be, well, let's establish a pass-fail criteria first. So the pass-fail criteria is, does this claim or do these claims line up with what we understand of the scripture in context with its historical relevance, as well as who the writer is. So in order to establish that, let's go ahead and look at the context. Who's writing this? Well, this is Matthew's account of Jesus's ministry, his life and his death, and his resurrection. So whenever we're looking at any sort of book or any sort of religious writings, we've got to ask, was he reliable, the person? Well, yes, he was a first-hand account. This is Matthew, who was one of the earliest followers of Jesus. Again, this is from his point of view. So yes, this would be considered very reliable. So who was he? What was his background? He was a tax collector. Tax collectors were absolutely hated during the time period. Jews saw them as a traitor to their people because, again, they were being occupied by Rome at the time. Rome would come in. They would select tax collectors from the local natives and then rely on them to go and collect taxes. And he was viewed as someone who had betrayed his people and collaborated with an occupying force. So he would not have been held in high regard at the beginning. So when was this written? It would be very poor if this was, a couple hundred years after the events happened that this gospel was written down. No, again, this is from the first-hand account. So this would have been within the lifetime of Matthew. Some people date it anywhere between 40 AD and 80 AD. The only reason it's dated so far away is because it does predict the destruction of the temple that occurred in 70 AD. Although, if you believe that Jesus could prophesy and could have predicted that to happen, it does look like 40 is more favorable. So this could be, again, anywhere between 7 years from the final events in the book to 47 years. So there's a bit of a gap there. Do remember that this book was written almost 2,000 years ago about events that happened almost 2,000 years ago. This book has survived through multiple rising and falling of nations. So historical evidence from that time period is rare. We go off of a lot of historical characters we have less evidence for than we do Jesus of Nazareth, such as Alexander the Great and the Battle of Troy are two pretty good examples of very little information that we have, but we know they are historical facts. So let's review the claims that are made by the LGBT community. They claim that this verse is referring to transgender people. Another one is saying that this verse is referring to homosexual relationships. Another one claims that this verse is referring to people that are in non-binary gender relationships or queer relationships. So those are the three main claims that we will be examining in this and taking apart the verse bit by bit and seeing it within context of that history. So let's look at our definitions. So what is a eunuch? The word eunuch seems to be critical to this argument one way or the other. So this would really be the litmus test to show if these claims are relevant or if these claims are a fabrication. So a eunuch is a man without, well, basically his twig and berries, either due to a birth defect or by being gilded. Snippy, snippy. This man would be incapable of having sex, so no sexual activity at all. So that would be the definition of eunuch. Queer, since we did refer to that, and I did have to look up the definition because for some reason this thing seems to change faster than anyone really can keep record of. So the most common definition I was able to find says that it refers to a person who is not straight and or not male or female or neither. It gets murky. I know people like making up new definitions for words such as eunuch and applying them to the scripture, saying, well, now we got to take this scripture and look at it through this new definition, which I just made up because that's the way it's always been. That's the way they sell it. It's because they claim that it's always been that way. We see this many times throughout recent history. So, hey, Isaac. Hey, Kim Newton, welcome. Okay. So let's tear this down a bit more. I'll open this up to Q&A and break it down with you guys a bit more after we are done. I just want to go through and get through the main points first. So let's break down the verse and keep it in context. So now that we've established all our definitions, the claims, what the verse is entirely, we can now start looking at what parts are possibly leading to these conclusions or these hypotheses or these claims. So the first one is the first section that we are seeing, for there are eunuchs who are born that way. Okay. So this is a popular one for them to try to claim this to be transgender or homosexual. So would these eunuchs be transgender or homosexual? Well, according to what we're seeing from the LGBT community, some do claim that they're born that way. Okay, well, the parts that make up your genetic code is called DNA and genes. So is there a trans gene or a gay gene? No, There are none. So no one is actually born that way. In context with history, we see that this is actually referring to someone who is born with a birth defect, who cannot have sex at all. In fact, again, we're referring to guys only. This is not referring to women in this case, because that's the definition of eunuch. So let's go on to the second portion here. And there are eunuchs who have been made eunuchs by others. Okay, wow, this is interesting. So made by others. So, like a surgery, right? So maybe this is more open to the whole transgender claim of it. Well, there's some issues with that. Some may claim that this is referring to gender reassignment surgery. But if we look at the historical evidence of eunuchs and how they've always been used within history, we see that doesn't hold any water. In fact, you have to be incredibly ignorant of history in order to make this claim. Eunuchs were commonly, at least the ones that were forced into it, because this was not by their choice. This was, hey, we have a queen who needs to have male servants, but the king wants to make sure she's not screwing around. Or we have a princess whose daddy wants to make sure that she is not fooling around with the help. So we make sure snip, snip. And these guys are no longer questionable. They can be trusted absolutely with my daughter's virginity, because they don't have, they have a lack of sex drive, because that occurs whenever they became a eunuch. They no longer desired sex. And on top of that, they don't have the equipment required anymore. So yeah, those were the ones who were made by others. It was not normally a willing thing and would not apply to this situation. So part number 3. And there are those who choose, this is a choice, to live like eunuchs. Interesting. Okay, so there's a choice in this. So, first of all, that should be a red flag to anyone who has debated any LGBTQ advocate or any progressive Christian who wants to make it all about love. It clearly states in here that this is a choice. So this is something they are choosing. The LGBTQ community does not like the word choice whenever it's referred to homosexuals. They consider that nothing but hate speech, because it's not a choice. It is the way they're born, or they're forced into it. They have no choice in the matter. They have to be homosexual. So if they're trying to make the claim that these eunuchs who choose to live, or the ones who choose to live like eunuchs, that those are homosexual relationships. One, again, if you're choosing to live like a eunuch, you're not having sex, so that goes out the window. But if you're saying, oh, they're living homosexual lives, this is still requiring this to be a choice that they make, which again is inconsistent with the stuff put out by the LGBTQ community. So is this referring to trans? Again, no. That would apply. And this would apply to both, what I'm going to go into, because it's very clear, because he clarifies why they are being eunuchs in our next section perfectly. He clarifies. Oh, nope, that's number 4. For the sake of the kingdom. So they're choosing to be eunuchs for the sake of the kingdom. They're choosing to live like eunuchs for the sake of the kingdom. They're dedicating that part of their lives, the part of sexuality, the part of wanting to go screw other people, the part of them that wants to have a family. They're giving that up for the sake of the kingdom. So that doesn't make any sense. And our final section of this verse is, the ones who can accept this should accept it. And this is where they say, well, God prefers it this way. He prefers us not to be in heterosexual relationships. He prefers it to be in homosexual relationships because he prefers it that way. Well, no. Again, in context with what we just covered, it cannot apply to either homosexuality or transgenderism. One, again, it would only be applying to men. And in historical context, it wouldn't apply that way. So no, this wouldn't be God showing preference to LGBTQ relationships. It would, but what is it truly meaning? So if we look back at the verse in full, for there are eunuchs who are born that way, and there are eunuchs who have been made eunuchs by others. And there are those who choose to live like eunuchs for the sake of the kingdom of heaven. The one who can accept this should accept it. Matthew 19:12. So as we were breaking this down, it's very apparent that the first section here is talking about eunuchs who are born with a birth defect. And then the second section is talking about people who have been forced or made eunuchs. And the final section are talking about people who choose to live as eunuchs. So they are choosing to live without sex. And that is something that is very alien to the LGBTQ lust society. They are all about sexual gratification, about whatever feels good, do it. Well, in this case, God is saying no, denying yourself, denying your desires. Paul also writes about this as well, saying, hey, if you can remain unmarried and you don't have that desire, do it and take that time that you would invest into that marriage and turn it into the kingdom of heaven. But if you do have those desires, go get married. It's better for you to go get married in that case. So does this claim hold any water? The answer is no. In context with everything, no. This makes no sense. In fact, this is a downright laughable claim when it comes down to it. It takes extreme ignorance. So, okay. So now that we are done with that, we'll go ahead and open this up to Q&A, take any questions about this subject, any questions about what's going on. I do want you guys to know that I have been officially banned from Patreon for something. I guess I talked about some subject and someone complained about it. So I got banned. They won't tell me why, but I did get banned. So the only way you can support this channel is through Buy Me a Coffee, which I will put the link is in the description and the link is there. So thank you guys so much for your time. Coming up next week, we will be talking about Seeking Allah, Finding Jesus. Next Sunday, we'll be doing a book review on it. That is the book by Nabil Qureshi. It is going to be an interesting one because this is very different from what we've already done. What we've covered was all science fiction, all fantasy sort of stuff. This one is our first time that we're going to be heading into actually talking about someone's life. And it's different as far as how you can do a review on it. You can't just say, well, I don't like the character development. The characters seem very unrealistic. Well, it's his life. So they are, by definition, realistic. What did I get banned for? I have no clue. They won't tell me. I've asked them quite a few times. They kept telling me, hey, you're banned because you violated our terms of service. I hadn't posted anything on there in a long time. So I call malarkey on that. I think someone got annoyed at me and just started making a bunch of pointless allegations because they can't point to anything. So what part of my religious content did they ban? I don't know. So that'll be the answer to that one. So I know this Wednesday we have got a brief history of the third rightly guided caliph. We'll be going over that one finally. And then this Thursday, I think is the first. This Thursday or Friday, we will be starting our shorts on the logical Quran. So, or the illogical Quran. Either way they want to look at it. We'll be taking surahs from the Quran, examining them, applying basic logic and intelligence to them to see if they hold any water. We will be going through many claimed scientific, miraculous signs that are in the Quran, stuff that Muhammad had no way of knowing for hundreds of years after his death. So we will examine those and see if any of them hold water, or if this is kind of up the creek without a paddle and there's nothing to hold the Quran together. But it will also give you guys what you need if these points are ever brought up in a conversation. So thank you guys so much for joining us. I hope this was informative. I know that we had someone comment on the live stream before this started. Oh, Justin commented before this started that he had already heard a preacher actually talk about this, not in the way I did, but not investigating it, seeing if the claims actually have any merit, but in the claim that it is true. So that is, as you've seen, nonsensical. This claim really doesn't hold any water, as we've examined. So I guess what we will do is we are going to go ahead and end in prayer. So if you guys have any prayer requests, please add them as we start praying, and I will throw them in if I see them before we are done. Lord of heaven and earth, thank you for this opportunity we have to examine your word. Thank you that your word is clear, crystal clear. There is no doubt about it. We can easily examine it, examine history, and see that it aligns 100%. I ask for your hand to be upon anyone who is misled by this claim, who believes this claim. I ask for your hand to be upon them. I know that in your word, homosexuality, transgenderism, all this stuff that is being pushed is all sin, and it's all rooted within pride and lust. Lord, I ask for your hand of mercy and grace to be reached out to them, that they get the opportunity to come to know you, forsake the sin and depravity that they are lost in, and accept the life, the everlasting full life in you. Lord, I lift up friend B and friend V as they are struggling in their own lives. I ask for your hand to be upon both of them. I also ask you to bless Jessica, who joined our stream last Friday. It was a very productive time, and I ask for your hand to be upon her as she begins her search for you. May your love overflow in each of our lives, and please help us be a light for your glory and your honor. Amen.